But I tell you, when I went was
Hold
when.
on.
Oh. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's edition of Black Health Trust. We are so happy that you chose to spend some time with us. We are happy that you joined us, and we're going to have a very informative discussion about a subject that I know our regulars know a lot about, but as with everything, things change. So without further ado, I will turn it over to our founder, Dr. Randall Maxey.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you again for joining us. Thank you, Dr. Neighbor Stevens, Dr. Ivan Walks, and Dr. Hines for joining with me. I want to make a brief comment. The past 2 weeks, Dr. Neighbor and Walks left the country. While they were gone, everything went crazy in the Middle East. I don't know if it's because they left the country or what. But we had two programs, one which was the biblical basis of the problems going on in the Middle East, and one was an aspect of the potential effects of the military action there. And I showed a video that came from 2010. And on that video, which is called This Land Is Mine, basically showed a series of military events that occurred over the centuries over that land. And it ended up with an atomic explosion and a death head, basically showing the earth being destroyed by men's inability to get along. And one of the things that I prefaced the program with on our last visit was that according to the Christian belief, at least, and the Bible, God says vengeance is his. But we as less than intelligent men and women have taken that vengeance is ours. We hit back for hit back and have not heeded God's word that vengeance is his. He gets the final word. And there were some people who were a bit confused by why I showed that video, but that was my purpose. The other reason is that I think that in your overall lives and health, you need to be aware of what's going on around you. Not just is your blood pressure up, not just is your diabetes up, not just as you take the vaccine, but you need to know the way of the world so you can properly defend your family and yourself. So I'm going to invite comments as we go along our program today. We're going to have an open mic. We're going to talk a little bit about diabetes and nutrition and diet, but I want to make sure that we can comment all along. And since some people thought what I showed might have been a bit controversial, I will take full credit that Dr. Walks was in China, Dr. Neighbor Stevens was in Europe, Dr. Hines was one, but I showed the video on what I was personally thinking. And I enjoy your comments. And I enjoy those programs, quite frankly. And I had one of my respected doctors write me a letter. We had a discussion, and I will invite her to say words later. But with that, let's show the first slide, Simon. We'll talk a little bit about diabetes, but I'll make sure we talk about some of the past 2 weeks, should we want to do that as well.
So Dr. Maxey, you want to share with our audience why we're talking about diabetes today?
Okay, I will. Show the first slide.
Hold on, I didn't know you sent slides. I got to pull them up.
Okay. Well, we know that diabetes is raising its head, it's rising. It accounts for a lot of the problems that happen, especially in our communities of color. And it causes, I consider diabetes in some ways worse than cancer. It can affect every organ in your body, from your eyes, your brain, your heart, your kidneys, your limbs, and it's bad. And if you don't take care of it, it can cause severe disability. And a lot of people know a bit about it. We used to call it the sugar. But as it turns out, that is only part of the problem. And we're also having a lot of people trying to find ways to save themselves from diabetes and treat themselves. So I wanted to show why some of that is the problem. Did you find the slides yet, Simon?
That wasn't the answer I was expecting, Dr. Maxey. The answer I was expecting was that this is Diabetes Month, and we wanted to pay our respects to the topic and share some comments with our audience.
Okay, I'm sorry about that.
I should have sent you a cue card. I'm sorry.
Like I say, I miss you being away. Did you find them, Simon?
It's having a second load and give me.
Okay.
So what Dr. Maxey was just saying really supports why we need to have a diabetes month, why there needs to be a focus on something that, and I'm sure you'll get to this, Dr. Maxey, that really impacts in particular our community. It can impact everyone, but in particular the community of folks that we focus on this program. So I think in some of our communities, Diabetes Month is every month.
Amen to that. I used to tell my medical students when I was teaching that diabetes affects everywhere the blood goes. So if you want to think about the complications of diabetes, think about where blood goes.
Oh. Because some of the complications are the fact that it will stop the blood from going in certain places. I hope you found it, Simon.
There we go.
Okay. So if we can turn to that first slide. Go to the first slide. And I'm going to invite my co-moderators to comment as we go through, and some will go through faster. So type 1 diabetes, just to mention it, and more or less to get it out of the way today, because it's a totally different entity than type 2, is characterized by an autoimmune destruction of the pancreas cells, the beta cells. And this leads to an absolute deficit of the hormone insulin. So all these people with type 1 diabetes basically require insulin to be given. You can get ketoacidosis. It's very severe. We used to call this juvenile onset, but we know it's not just juvenile onset, but it's the absence of beta cells in the pancreas. Go to the next slide. So type 2 diabetes is characterized by hyperglycemia. That means high blood sugar in the blood. And high blood sugar, for those who have it, know that it can make you urinate a lot, get up at night to urinate, even though that's not the only thing it will do it, but it will do that. It can also make you thirsty. because the osmolality of the concentration of that glucose in the blood is high. It's also characterized by what we call insulin resistance, meaning that insulin normally takes glucose out of the blood into the cells, but for some reason, it won't go inside, so it stays outside. That's insulin resistance. And there's a relative impairment of the insulin that's in your body from working on your muscular cells and other cells that go in. But in truth, type 2 diabetes is a heterogeneous disease. It's from different causes, not one thing. It's not just one thing. It's really a disease of your blood vessels, of the inside lining of your blood vessels, or the plaque that it causes, and it can also cause blood vessels to decrease function. Next slide. So it's by far the most common type. In adults, more than 90% of people that are adults have that type. It's characterized by the high blood sugar and variable degrees of insulin resistance. And the symptoms are classically polyuria, urinating a lot, thirst, polydipsia, nocturia, get up at night, blurred vision, and weight loss. And these symptoms are often only noticed in retrospect. Let's go to the next slide. So it's a very common disorder, and it's rising markedly in our community of the United States in general, but especially in communities of color, and especially as we become more obese. So the prevalence has risen alarmingly, especially because of the trends of obesity and a sedentary lifestyle. Need to get off the couch. Next slide. So patients are affected by various things that affect the insulin secretion. We know that insulin doesn't act in a 2 diabetic, it doesn't as well and come out as much, and it may even be deformed in its action. But some of the things that happen under the covers are inflammation increases in certain organs, and we find that inflammation is the basis of a lot of things like heart disease, kidney disease, etc. Inflammation, and we'll talk about inflammation on one of our future programs, what inflammation really is. We know that there are abnormalities of lipoprotein, and lipoproteins are your fat-containing proteins that happen in the body. We know it can affect your blood pressure, hypertension, it can affect your blood vessels, the inside of your blood vessels and how they constrict, and it causes other metabolic abnormalities. Next slide. So we know that it's caused by reasons that are multifactorial. We won't go through the slides, Simon. Let's go to the next one. You can go to the next one. So if you do have diabetes, we know that you need to have a comprehensive education program to how to manage and how to be educated about what to do. So you need instruction and knowledge on nutrition and on your eating patterns. We know that you need to increase your physical activity and instructions on that, and how to optimize the control of metabolism. And we want to prevent complications. You don't want to have your toes and feet cut off. And most of the physicians on here know that once they start cutting, they have to keep cutting higher and higher and end up with a whole limb amputated above the knee. But the other complications, such as loss of eyesight, loss of kidney function, heart attacks can affect. Weight reduction becomes very important. And we know that diet, exercise, and behavioral modification is especially important. Let's go to the next slide. So looking at food, and the person I go to when I'm hungry and talk about food is my favorite cook in Tampa, Florida now. So Barbara, would you look at this slide and just comment on it?
I think, as I have often said, that we complicate things. And what I would say about food, we have said on multiple shows, we need a well-balanced diet that is as free as possible of additives and sugar content, especially added sugars. There's some things that have sugar normally, but added sugar combined with understanding the purpose of eating and when we should eat should be to satisfy hunger. We should consume our meals in a mindful way and not eat mindlessly nibbling. We need to have some organization to how we eat. We need to have 3 to 4, depending on who you read, 3 to 4 small to moderate sized meals a day. There are those who advocate a limited time during which you should eat. That's kind of a controversial area now. But the idea is that we don't need to overeat. We need to eat clean, balanced meals and try to enjoy, feed our stomach, put food in our stomach, and allow our brain to enjoy that meal.
Now, I ask you to comment on this, and this slide is a little bit controversial. In my experience with people with diabetes and issues of weight loss, we know, and I agree with you, that there is a brain problem because your brain controls your appetite, your hunger, etc. And one of the things that tends to go astray in people who are overweight, people who have diabetes, is the ability to feel full, and therefore they tend to overeat. So more recently, a drug that had been developed for treatment of diabetes by making you urinate out more of your glucose was found to also cause weight loss. And where it causes weight loss is decrease the emptying of your stomach to make you feel full. And this drug is called semaglutide. There's one called Wachovia. There's a whole bunch of them. And for the most part, they have a very good effect, but they have some potential side effects that bother a minority of the patients. But it fits in with everything that Dr. Neighbors says. So a lot of people, and I have started putting a lot of my diabetics and obese people on drugs, but there has to be a meal plan along with it. And like people who substance abuse, it's sometimes difficult to intellectually control those cravings to eat something at midnight or 2 o'clock in the morning. Let's go to the next slide. Thank you, Dr. Neighbors-Stevens. So on this one, I'd like maybe, I think you have a set of slides too, Dr. Walks. We can comment on these.
Sure. This slide, Dr. Maxey, is interesting because it really goes back to what Dr. Neighbors-Stevens was talking about. Just thinking about what we're going to eat and planning, as opposed to stopping at the nearest drive-through and just eating. it's amazing how much food we get fed in one meal. Some of the restaurants, when you go in and sit down, they will have the calorie count next to the item, and one item can be 2,400 calories, which is a lot for one meal when you're going to eat 2 or 3 more meals during the course of the day. So I think this is a slide really supporting the notion that we have to think about what we eat and understand what we eat. When somebody says we're eating a primarily plant-based diet, what does that mean? Does that mean that you get a salad and you put 2,000 calories worth of salad dressing on it? Probably not the best plan. So this whole idea of thinking about food and eating intelligently is something that I think we can continue to stress for folks.
Thank you, Dr. Wilson. That is so important, except he hit me in the head with that salad dressing. I like salad dressing more than I do salad. At least I used to. I'm trying to regulate that as well. And Dr. Hines, we have another slide, if you would comment on that coming. And I put semi-glutide in there. You don't have to comment on that if you don't want to, but I made these for what I'm doing with patients.
I think Dr. Hines is still muted.
Yes.
There we go.
All right. So a semi-glutide program. This is going to be news to me because while I'm familiar with the drugs themselves, I hadn't necessarily familiarized myself with their diet in particular. But in general, this is getting back to, again, things that you kind of already know, like what Dr. Stevens was saying about not complicating things. So, the focus on eating vegetables, right? Asparagus, broccoli, cabbage, cauliflower. Okay, makes sense. And then there's already a lot of dietary recommendations around making sure that you get the appropriate number of servings of fruits and vegetables, and then whole grains, complex carbohydrates. I think complex carbohydrates can be kind of confusing to people because you get into this space where you're like, oh, don't eat carbs. But lots of times I don't think people appreciate exactly what carbs are, because there's carbohydrates in lots of different types of food, and they're not necessarily bad. So for example, as this points out, like things like oatmeal, brown rice, whole wheat breads, they also, in addition to having more fiber content, they also help you feel full for longer, and you don't need to eat as much of them. So there are good forms of carbohydrates beyond just, the pasta that people think about when they think about carbohydrates.
Okay,
but I think to Dr. Stevens' point, moderation.
That makes it common sense and moderation, right?
Exactly.
Next slide. So we know that with a weight loss diet, and we think that the majority of people with diabetes may need to lose weight. We do know there's some skinny diabetics as well, but this is a general program. That nuts are a good source of fiber and protein. They also help keep you full, and they're rich in unsaturated fats, and this may be beneficial to your heart health. So you can pair that with fruits for nutritious things, legumes like beans. Those are good, but you have to watch some of the legumes. They may be starchy as well. And we know that you want to have protein-rich food, and important to eat enough calories for the body size. You don't want to starve yourself. And like I said earlier by one of the speakers, that you want to eat at least 3 meals. I recommend that you eat 5 small meals. So if you're going to eat 300 calories, it'll be 300 calories times 5 meals a day or more. And most people need a diet of anywhere from 1,500 calories to 2,400 calories a day. If you're larger, you may need more calories. Let's have the next slide.
So while we're changing slides, Dr. Maxey, we talked about how the salad dressing can really mess up your salad. Well, you can get anything messed up. I happen to like raw almonds, which is not a bad thing to like. But as I'm looking through the supermarket shelf to get to my raw almonds, You can get almonds that have all sorts of stuff on them. A whole bunch of salt, a whole bunch of sugar, honey roasted. I'm like, wait. So when we say nuts, do not pull up the honey roasted barbecue nuts and think that that's the great part of your healthy diet.
Good, very good point.
I just want to piggyback on that too. When we talk about the 4 to 5 small meals a day, I think a lot of people lose it in the space of what constitutes a meal, right? So it doesn't necessarily mean that you have had 4 to 5 small plates of a fruit, a starch, a carb, a protein. Like that's gonna get you in trouble.
You gotta have some mashed potatoes, right?
Right,
No.
exactly. And I think a lot of people get confused because they think they're following the directions, when the reality is that a meal could be a yogurt and apple, right? Like that's a meal, and then you go on to the next meal. So people, if you're going to use that model, you have to be, to Dr. Walks's point too, very careful about what you consume, because sometimes you don't have to consume a lot of something to do, I won't say damage, but to have a significant impact. The classic place for that is in desserts, right? So, it only takes a little bit of dessert to kind of negate the weight loss efforts. And lots of times we over reward ourselves for our good deed. Oh, I went walking today, or oh, I did my exercise today, and I'm going to treat myself with, I don't know, ice cream sandwich, right? Well, the ice, how long you gotta walk to make that ice cream sandwich go away? It's unfair, but it's also the reality of the situation.
Can you talk a minute about water intake?
You know what? One of the great things about water is water will absolutely help you, one, feel full, right? Because it just takes up space. But it's also a great detoxifier. So it can help you get rid of some of the salts that you may have intake, some of the bloating feelings that you may have had. I will say, if you increase your water intake, like if you're someone who's drinking, 1 or 2 cups of water a day, and for some of you, you could be going, how could I drink 1 or 2 cups of water a day? It could be because lots of times as you're moving through your day, especially depending on how your day moves, where you work, you may not have the opportunity to take in a lot of fluids across the day. So it's really easy to not take in a large amount of water. And when you first start taking in water, it may not necessarily feel comfortable to a certain extent, right? It may make you feel a little bloated and those kinds of things, but then as you normalize to taking in water more regularly, it will absolutely help you in your weight loss efforts. Not to mention, you may see benefits in how your skin looks, how your energy feels, all kinds of things like that too.
Excellent. And we know that by the process of just breathing, you lose another 1.5 liters or 1,500 cc's of water just in your breath. So we're losing water. You think you're just losing water with sweat or losing water with urination, but you're losing what we call insensitive loss through your skin, may not, and through your lung breathing, the process. Now, we know that weight loss patients also need to know about a low diet plan. And typically, a healthy adult woman may require maybe anywhere from 1,600 to 2,400 calories for a woman, and generally from 2,000 to 3,000 calories for a man, because men are typically a little bit bigger. So we want to make sure that you don't starve yourself. And you want, through your exercise, use enough calories in a day to develop a calorie deficit, and that will help you lose weight. Let's go to the next slide. So here's some things Dr. Neighbor mentioned this.
So these are the things that we want to understand that we need to avoid, but more than just need to avoid, understand why we need to avoid them. So refined grains and sugar can be thought of as empty calories. And I tell patients when I'm counseling, think of your diet as a bank account or a budget, and you have X amount that you can spend a day. Do you, and let's say for the sake of the model, that you are a person who needs to, your goal is to consume 1,500 calories a day. All right, now, if you go and fix yourself a plate that's full of mashed potatoes or candied yams and fried chicken, or better yet, barbecue, dripping with barbecue sauce, you have probably doubled your intended dietary intake for that day. Or let me give you another example. Let's say that you planned your lunch. You fixed yourself a sandwich made with white meat chicken that was baked, and you took the skin off, and you put it on some whole wheat bread, and you put lettuce, and you put tomato on it. That's a good start. But then you go to the vending machine and you get a regular Coca-Cola. You have just undone all of your good work, and you have spent up all of your calories that you can have for the day enjoying that Coke or Pepsi. I won't just pick on Coke, Pepsi, Sprite, whatever, because it's full of added sugar. That's why, and I kind of thought it wasn't going to work, and I'm not sure whether it worked or not, but there was a mayor of New York who outlawed soft drinks, and he was trying to get people to understand that they were drinking all this sugar. Again, I'm going back to common sense, simple thinking, and planning.
And let me ask Dr. Walks to comment on the fact that what is comfort food, and why is it important or not important? The concept of comfort foods, and in this day of stress, why do we need comfort food, and do we need it?
So Dr. Maxey, maybe I should just be quiet, because when Dr. Neighbor Stevens was describing the meal with the candied yams and the fried chicken, I was getting ready to get up and try to go find some of that. Look, people know what tastes good to us. And what tastes good to us is typically fat, salt, and sugar. They taste good. And so people don't add sugar by accident. They add sugar because they want us to eat more or drink more. Same thing with fat, same thing with salt. So let's just acknowledge that. So when we see these movies where somebody has some sad news or a bad breakup, and they sit down with a big soup spoon and a big thing of ice cream, and they're eating the ice cream, that is real. And even people who are extremely fit and manage their diets all the time, they talk about something called a cheat day, where they will be very stringent with their diet for the week, and maybe Saturday or Sunday is their cheat day, when they eat some things that would not be part of what's considered a healthy diet. So yeah, comfort food makes you feel, a lot of times it makes you feel kind of tired and listless. And if you want to just sit down and not do anything, eating a half-gallon of ice cream will do it for you. Really hard to get up and go for a run after you've taken in a lot of food. But let me also add that when we are trying to eat healthy, to Dr. Neighbor Stevens' point about undoing the nice sandwich on the wheat bread, I heard something, and I don't know if it's true, on one of the radio stations a couple of days ago about, when you're trying to get your kids to eat whole wheat bread, there is a white whole wheat bread that tastes like white bread, but it's actually whole wheat bread. Now, I don't know. I just know that it's going to make me start reading the labels carefully to make sure that I'm looking at what are the calories, what's the whole grain, what's the carbohydrate. These aren't hard things. Like Dr. Neighbor Stevens says, we make it too complicated. Read the label, see what's there, know what you're eating. And I remember talking to young people about nutrition, and I said, well, what happens if you put really cheap gas in your Ferrari? Oh, no, you wouldn't do that. Well, consider your body a temple, a Ferrari, whatever it is that makes you concerned about what kind of fuel you put into your body, and be thoughtful about it. That's about as simple as I can make it.
Well, thank you so much.
I'm still going after those mashed potatoes and the rest of that stuff.
Can I just add though, but I think the point that you're making too about, for example, the white bread that actually is whole wheat bread, which I've had both, and thankfully my kids don't seem to know. I can buy any bread; they don't really care. But it is the importance of setting yourself up to be successful, and by that I'm talking about what your eyes see as appealing, right, matters.
Yeah.
So if you're going to have a diet or trying to make food choices that are healthier, you have to find a way to do it that also looks appealing to your eyes, right? So you don't just eat with your with your stomach, right? You eat with your eyes. You look at something. That's the whole reason for commercials, right? And why they make the commercials, have that thing look so good in the commercial, and then you will go ahead and eat it and consume it, knowing good and well that's not what it looked like when I saw it on TV, but you'll try it anyway. It matters that you pick things that are congruent with you as an individual. So if you like hot foods, right, and that's kind of what you prefer, setting yourself up to only have cold foods, because you're not going to be successful, right? And don't underestimate the time and what it takes to figure out what you as an individual like. I have discovered that I have a thing for crunchy things. I like to crunch stuff, right? So I have found out that I need to figure out something that gives me a little bit of a crunch, because I'll eat my healthy thing and then still be wanting something. And turns out, as I figured out, I just want to crunch something. So as you figure out what things work for you as an individual, the better you know yourself, the more likely you are to be successful with your efforts.
Dr. Hines, may I recommend roasted chickpeas?
Oh.
So I think this is the last slide. Is it Simon? We can take him down. Is this the last slide? Oh, I think we covered this one. Pretty much. Let's cut the slides. And I think that what Dr. Hines mentioned was so important. Let's cut the slides. And when we were talking about comfort foods, especially what we call comfort foods and soul food, we know that back during slavery times, we had a big onset of these comfort foods, but they were made to make bad, rotten food that were given to the slaves be at least palatable. And we developed all these sauces and gravies and coverings to make something so you could eat it. But in the process, we created something that was in many ways grossly unhealthy. And we know that human beings are hardwired to just what Dr. Hines was saying, something crunchy, something salty, and something sweet. So we have to look for ways around that. And I think, at least on a temporary basis, some of these new potential drugs might be useful to some people. But it also means that you have to be responsible with those, and you have to eat with common sense and use a low-calorie diet that is healthy. So with that, and we'll revisit some of these subjects again, are there any questions, Dr. Neighbor Stevens, Dr. Walton, Dr. Hines, regarding diabetes and the diet? or some of the other things that we question. And I know that a lot about diet is related to stress, perceived and unperceived. And I know that the world situation, as we see it, may involve a lot of stress, and comfort food and those mashed potatoes come from that. Maybe I need some now. Any questions? Any
No,
comments?
but I want to ask Dr. Stephen Thomas a question. If Simon, if you will unmute him. Given his work in the community, could you tell us what the top 5 myths are that you run into regarding diabetes?
That it's not so much a myth, but it's what's driving this behavior that is like under stress. If you put even the mice, when they put them under stress, they have these maladaptive behaviors. And so, Dr. Nesbitt Stevens, here's what I would say, just from my observations in a barbershop this weekend. You know, when it got heated, the most heated conversations was about child rearing. Here in the DC area, we got 12-year-olds, 13-year-olds, 15-year-olds carjacking, and that burst of conversation was about corporal punishment, who gets timeout, or who got a spanking, or who got hit with a strap. Parents afraid of their children because they can pick up the phone and call whatever number and have authorities show up. That stress drives maladaptive coping behaviors. And then they literally describe, Dr. Walks, that they have no access to the very fresh fruits and vegetables we're talking about. But like that, they can get any fast food you want. So they have to be much more intentional, like using Uber Eats or other places where they can order food. I think, Dr. Nesbitt Stevens, we need models. We need, Black Barber's Cookbook that keeps grandma's recipes tasty but healthy. They need examples. They need hands-on examples. And I think that's one of the ways to get them involved. We want to come up with some aprons over there, say, Black barbers who cook. We got to bring all that back to our community. And the last thing I'll say is this, and it's the strangest thing, because when I bring these food from the back of the truck home, my wife says, "You bought food from the back of somebody's truck." And I told her, absolutely. The Jamaicans and the Africans literally prepare home-cooked meals. And they bring it to the barbershop to feed the barbers and the clients. That's the village kind of mentality that we need to cultivate. And so they're trying to eat healthy by cooking meals at home. Now, they're way out of, the legalese and, health department regulations, but I am telling you, there's a lot of creativity in our community that we can unleash around this topic. There are people walking around with the amputations. Dr. Randall Maxey said, once they start cutting, they start cutting. And you can literally predict, once the first amputation, you can predict mortality if nothing else is done. That reality we need to bring into our communities as well. It is a totally preventable disease.
Thank you
Amen,
so much.
Dr. Thomas. Amen.
Amen. So I just noticed that when I was in Africa on several times, I was in the country of Zimbabwe, and there was almost at that time no such thing as diabetes as we know it. And that's because of not only the diet, but they walked every place or ran every place. They do all the things that we're telling our people to do nowadays. They just did it naturally. Very few people would have the metabolic problems that we have now. Any other thoughts? Thank you, Dr. Stephen Thomas. Anything else in the chat we want to address? Anybody want to make a comment on the diabetes or otherwise?
Two things in the chat, Dr. Maxey. Dr. Steiner rightfully referenced our dear friend Dr. Jordan and the importance and relevance of having a primary care physician who can keep track of things, monitor blood pressure, et cetera, and blood sugar, et cetera. And then Dr. Rhonda Johnson has some comments in the chat about our food industry and the fact that, as many of us who have lived in urban areas know, we tell folks to get out and take a walk around the block. Maybe the block walking is not safe. So there are challenges, real challenges in many of our communities. Also, Dr. Sherrod and then Dr. Lawson have their hands up.
Let me start off with Dr. Steiner. First of all, let me appreciate him. He helped me hold down the fort as a co-moderator when we had the rabbi and the pastor on, and helped keep me from flaming darts. I'd like to appreciate Dr. Steiner and let him make a comment and then go with Dr. Rhonda Johnson and the others in the order that you named, Dr. Walsh. Dr. Steiner?
Sure. Thank you, Dr. Maxey. On the diabetes, you can't stress this enough. And Dr. Jordan were here. Of course, he would tell everyone to first have a primary care physician and at least get a screening. And as you well know, but many folks don't, diabetes can have an indolent onset where you have no awareness of it for many, many years. And I can speak to that on personal experience. I watched my sugar slowly creep up, as it has done in many of my family members. And I want to share that I just started Rybelsus, which is a form of semaglutide, actually is semaglutide in a pill rather than injection. And in my first month, even though I didn't need to lose much weight, I lost 12 pounds. And of course, I think a lot of that was sugar stores. And also I had a plan, like you first mentioned when you came on this today. Besides these drugs, you said something very astute. You said, have a plan. And most folks don't have a plan. And so I had a plan that I would start to exercise regularly along with taking semaglutide. I'm anxious to see where my sugar is. I'll know in a couple of months. We'll go in for a test, but I feel better than ever. And so I want to let people know there are ways to get going. And the first step is awareness. So in reference to our dear friend, Dr. Jordan Gilbert, let's all start off with a primary care physician.
Let me make one quick comment. We have two medical heroes in the past, one being Hippocrates and the other being Imhotep. And Hippocrates had lived 5,000 years after Imhotep, diagnosed diabetics by dipping his finger in their urine and tasting it. If it was sweet, it meant they were diabetic. But Imhotep, way before him, he just said, pee in the sand, and if the ants go toward it to eat the sugar, you have diabetes. So I think he was much more profound than Hippocrates was. Who's next, Dr. Walks?
I'm sorry, Dr. Maxey. I'm still trying to get past the dipping the finger and tasting it. Dr. Johnson, you wanted to comment, and then Dr. Sherrod and Dr. Lawson.
Dr. Rhonda Johnson, my teacher. Is she unmuted?
Not yet.
There we go.
Hello, Dr. Maxey and the Black Health Trust. It's good to be back on the Zoom. I've been watching on YouTube for the past couple of months, but I can't help but put some blame as well. We tend to always go on this individual responsibility, but we fail sometimes to realize how systemic this problem is and how multifactorial it is. We have to look at children in particular. A lot of obesity and type 2 diabetes has its roots in children, and children don't choose their diets, and their parents feed them. And, when you look at food that is cheap, it is food that has a whole long shelf life, food that is high in salt, high in carbohydrates. And, you go to any grocery store in a resource poor community and you compare that to a grocery store, if they have one. First of all, we have food deserts here in Pittsburgh where our Black communities have absolutely no grocery stores whatsoever. And, you know, the store that they can go to is the dollar store. And what does the dollar store have? It has frozen meals that are, you know, prepared, and it has a lot of canned food, which tends to be high in sodium and other things, you know. So first of all, that's a problem. Then our kids go to school, and a lot of them get breakfast and they get lunch in school. They get an evening snack in school. And again, what kind of food are they feeding them in school? And sometimes it starts as early as daycare and Head Start. So, you know, you come into an environment where it's very, very challenging. And then, so, you know, these food preferences get learned at an early age. As a pediatrician, when I was still in practice, most of my mothers didn't cook food for their families. They did not know how to cook. And they didn't know how to shop either. And I used to actually have cooking classes for the mothers in my practice, where I would review with them how to cook. And sometimes you know, before they told me I couldn't do this, I used to take women to the store, a group of mothers, on my lunch break, and we would go to the store and I would show them how to shop. I'd give them $50 and I'd say, we're going to spend this $50 because I got so tired of them running out of food at the end of the month when their WIC supplements were gone. You know, so again, I number one, we have to really address the social determinants that contribute to these diabetes issues. And I think sometimes they are not given the weight that they are given. I don't have answers. I wish I had answers. I do want to acknowledge how complex this whole situation is.
Ask you a serious question. On this issue, do you believe that our society in general has conspired against its population to give them bad health for economic gain? And that's both pharmaceutical,
because you just have to watch television. You sit and watch some of these TV shows, in particular TV shows aimed at young people and children. I mean, what do you see? You turn on TV on a Sunday, which is a football Sunday right now, and what are you going to see? You're going to see beer commercials, every other commercial, or fast food, or pizza, or, you know, something like that. And it marketing. When I supported a sales team, they used to tell us, you give a message 25 times in a row and people are going to start to hear it and it's going to get ingrained. So again, these are sophisticated things that are aimed toward different populations, and it's hard to escape all of this. So again, I don't have answers. I'm very aware of all the problems.
Let me ask you to take one more second to comment. You were kind enough to comment to me personally. I wonder if you have any words you want to say about our previous topics.
They were difficult for me. Those two programs were difficult, Dr. Maxey, because this whole issues are difficult. And I confess that I was troubled by the video, because at first I didn't understand what the context of the video was. And I had to go back. You know, when I don't understand something, I take the time to try to do the research. So I actually spent time researching not only the video, but the artists who produced the video. And I learned, I understood what that was about. And I thought I understood what you were trying to do with that at the end of the show, but it would have been helpful for me to have the context. So that's all I'll say. But the two programs, these issues affect us. They're going to affect us. I saw President Biden, you know, say that we are closer to Armageddon than we have been since the Kennedy missile crisis. This is serious stuff here. You know, we're potentially getting close to the pressing of the red button. You know, I hope not, but we can't deny how serious this conflict is, you know, right now. So it's important to talk about it. That's all I'll say. It's important to talk about, and thank you for doing so.
It's so important to protect your mental health, not be distracted from your faith and belief in God, if you have that, and what that prayer really means. Thy will be done. And who's next, Dr. Walks?
And I will just
Dr.
say,
Shu-
I just want to say, I wrote to all of my congressional representatives, my 2 senators. I wrote to President Biden. I wrote to Vice President. I decided that was one thing that I needed to do. Right after Black Health Trust, I went on my computer and I started sending the emails, and I called, asking for a ceasefire and humanitarian aid. I only got one response from Senator John Fetterman, and he sent an email back the next day. But at least, I was moved to action from our show last week. So thank you for that.
Amen.
Thank you.
Amen. So we have Dr. Johnson, you are on point. Yes. Dr. Sherrod and Dr. Lawson.
Yeah, good afternoon, Black Health Trust. I've been listening to all the conversations, and I think all of the information is very important. This is a very difficult, very complex problem. I just want to point out that I agree with Dr. Steiner in that you need that primary care physician, as Dr. Jordan promoted, because diabetes actually is a long course. It starts earlier than when you make the manifestation of the symptoms. And if you have a primary care physician who's following your labs, you can actually tell when you've developed insulin resistance, because you develop that before you develop full-blown diabetes. And I myself was able to reverse mine by changing my diet. I want to emphasize that it's not just the sugar, salt, and fats, but there are other inflammatory foods that we should also be avoiding, like wheat and gluten, dairy, soy, and eggs, and high fructose corn syrup. And we get so much processed food. We have to educate our population to be vigilant in what they're putting into their bodies. If you read the label and you don't recognize any of the ingredients, you probably shouldn't be eating that particular product. And so the systemic influence is also something that we have very little control over. But I think in regards to what Dr. Johnson made, a statement she made about children, I think we as adults are responsible for our kids, and we have to look out for them and campaign for them and advocate for them. I just want to make one last statement, and that is the high fructose corn syrup should be avoided in most foods because it destroys the liver. But let me just give one last example. I had a friend who had been coughing, and this is not diabetes, but had been coughing for 8 months. And I said, well, did you have COVID? He had COVID, but it wasn't COVID. So I asked him if he would go on a restricted diet and take out dairy, wheat, and eggs for 21 days. On the 12th day, his cough went away. By the 21st day, his cough is completely gone just from adjusting the diet. This is just to emphasize how important the diet is. And there are so many other factors that we need to also work with, but the food that we're being presented is not good.
And thank you so much. And one thing you said to me that was personally very important, one of my favorite foods used to be cream of wheat. And wheat is one of the most difficult problems for a lot of people. And maybe we'll talk about that nutritionally, some of the things that people are eating, and even that we recommended. And I also like what Dr. Stephen Thomas said about corporal punishment, and maybe we'll curate a program about corporal punishment or not having corporal punishment and what it really means. Dr. Lawson, available.
Yes, I am. And I just want to reinforce what's already been said. And in addition, add to that, that one of the best screeners I think the primary care providers use is a PHQ-9. Strong relationship between depression and diabetes. And I've been working with Dr. Nunley Bland at Howard University's Diabetes Center, and she noted the importance that anxiety may be even more important than depression. We did a study a couple of years ago showing that half people in our primary care clinic had post-traumatic stress disorder and depression, and this was replicated at Morehouse. Bottom line is many of our folks live in an environment in which they're exposed to chronic stress and what we call the impact of institutional racism contributing to depression and chronic anxiety. And if we don't address those, you can change the diet all you want. It's going to be very difficult to make an impact in terms of diabetes. I think one of the best things I ever did was when I went into semi-retirement after being chair, I saw my diabetes improve 1,000%. I also want to note the interesting observation. I started one of the new medication, Moderna, and lo and behold, found that my interest in alcohol dropped. And now there's 2 clinical trials going on showing that these agents, not only do they help to treat diabetes, but they also seem to have an impact in terms of substance abuse and alcohol use as well, and showing that the brain centers that's related to enjoying tasty, high, rewarding food intimately tied in with some of the other behaviors that we have that's showing with high risk behavior in our community.
And thank you so much, Dr. Lawson. Are any other members of our audience, some of our non-physicians especially, that would like to comment on either topic? I emphasize you don't be an MD or a doctor.
I don't see any hands raised, Dr. Maxey, and I think we've covered most of what's in the chat.
Well, we thank this audience being with us today. We have covered quite a bit today, and we need to cover more. Let's ask our co-moderators to have final words. Dr. Hines.
I think, we have, this conversation has exposed, I think, some of the complexities around what it takes for weight loss. There was definitely, our knowledge and in that space has definitely evolved over the recent past. It used to be just, calories in, calories out, but now we know there's so much more to it. And to Dr. Rhonda Johnson's point about just acknowledging beyond the individual efforts, there is a systemic process that we're all kind of living in. There was a comment in the chat around the addictiveness of food, and there are several recent articles around ultra-processed foods being as addictive as nicotine or alcohol. So, as Dr. Lawson was saying, it's complicated, right? So there's lots of conversations we could have on this, but I think some of the things that we fleshed out were places where you can at least start.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Hines. Dr. Welch.
I think for my final comment, Dr. Maxey and folks who are on with us today, Dr. Lawson's comment about the integration of the behavioral health concerns with what we sometimes refer to as general health concerns is really critical. We are whole people that come into the doctor. If we are blessed with a primary care provider, we come in there with our aches and pains on the physical health side and our aches and pains on the mental health side. And it's important for our primary care folks to look comprehensively at us and try to help us on both fronts, either with what they can do with the screening Dr. Lawson mentioned, and what they can do with referrals, getting to know other folks who might be able to treat some of the things that they can't treat. So, or they don't have the same level of expertise to treat. So I think that we, as we have with this particular program, looked at the overall human and looked for ways to make that life a better, longer, healthier life. I think we just have to continue to do that.
Thank you, Dr. Walsh. Dr. Barbara Neighbor-Stevens.
Well, I want to end kind of where I started when I made the comment that we talked about diabetes before, but new things get learned and things change. I was expecting my 2 pediatric colleagues to make a comment about this, but they didn't, so I'm going to do it. So there have been recent studies indicating that it is believed that mothers who have diabetes during pregnancy are setting the stage in various ways, and it's way more than I can go into now. But because of their diabetes and their high sugar levels are leading to the development of obesity in their offspring after they are born. So there's a lot more to this yet to be learned, but we need to keep studying it, and we need to keep addressing it, and we need to keep trying to get it under control.
Thank you, Barbara Neighbor-Stevens. And just to add on to what she's saying, some of the new things in addition to that, it plays in. The whole thing that Dr. Lawson brought up about anxiety and stress may play a role in not only the development of diabetes, but if you look at TV nowadays, maybe we shouldn't anymore. I believe that there's a conspiracy to keep us all under stress, to keep us all distracted, whether it be the war in the Middle East, whether it be shootings in Baltimore, just from one thing to the other. A lot of people like to blame things on the former president. I think that may not even be the factor. It's just another confusing, stressful factor. And that affects our disease. It affects our faith and our concentration. And we should know about those things. As far as the overall conspiracy of the population, we know that walking on certain plastics and types of chemicals that are in things like rugs and linoleums can also cause diabetes as well as stress. So there's a lot more to the story. We have to be more smart, and we'll try to unravel some of these things as we go along. Thank you for your interest in being here, and thank you for your conversation. The time change, which I only got reminded by Simon. Enjoy your Sunday and enjoy the day, and we'll be back next week. Thank you so much. Have a great day.
Good day, everyone.
Bye.